She thought she was the queen of the sky. She thought her money gave her the right to judge. But Victoria Street Claire made one fatal mistake at 30,000 feet. She didn't just call security on a passenger. She called security on the man who built the plane, owns the airline, and could buy her entire family's estate with a signature. This is the story of how entitlement met its match, and the brutal karma that followed. You won't believe how the pilot reacts. The air inside the Teterboro Airport private terminal tasted expensive. It was a distinct blend of brewing espresso, polished mahogany, and the faint, sterile chill of recycled air conditioning that only the ultra-wealthy ever truly got to breathe. This wasn't just the standard first-class lounge at JFK. This was the invite-only waiting area for Apex Horizon, a revolutionary charter service bridging the gap between commercial first-class and full private jet ownership. Victoria St. Claire adjusted the oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, though the lighting in the lounge was tastefully dim. She tapped her manicured nails, painted a shade of red that probably cost more than a mid-sized sedan, against the glass of her champagne flute. "Is the flight delayed?" she snapped, not looking at the concierge standing 3 feet away. "No, Mrs. Street Claire," the young woman, Chloe, replied, her smile tight but professional. "We are simply waiting for one final passenger before we begin the boarding process for the Horizon G700 to London. We pride ourselves on a full manifest today." Victoria scoffed, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the ambient jazz. "Waiting? I don't wait. My husband, Richard, specifically booked this charter because he said it was efficient. If I wanted to wait for stragglers, I would have flown Delta." She took a sip of her vintage Dom Perignon, her eyes scanning the room. It was empty, save for her and her mountain of Louis Vuitton luggage, which she had insisted remain by her side rather than be checked immediately. She didn't trust the handlers. She didn't trust anyone who made less than 7 figures. The automatic glass doors slid open with a whisper. Victoria glanced up, expecting perhaps a diplomat, a tech mogul in a hoodie, or maybe a famous actor. Instead, a tall black man walked in. He was dressed in a simple, charcoal wool coat over a black turtleneck and dark denim. On his feet were pristine white sneakers, and in his hand, he carried nothing but a battered brown leather rucksack. He looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Victoria's lip curled. She watched as he walked to the concierge desk. He didn't have the frantic energy of a late passenger. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, like a man who controlled time rather than obeyed it. "Good afternoon, Chloe," the man said. His voice was a deep baritone, smooth like aged whiskey. "Traffic on the bridge was a nightmare. Hope I haven't held up the departure." Chloe, the concierge, lit up. It wasn't the polite customer service smile she had given Victoria. It was genuine warmth. "Not at all, Mr. Sterling. We're always happy to see you. Can I get you a drink before we head to the tarmac? The espresso machine is warmed up." "Just a water, thanks," he said, leaning casually against the counter. Victoria watched the exchange, her indignation rising like bile. Mr. Sterling. Who was this? He didn't look like the typical clientele. No suit, no entourage. That rucksack looked like it had been through a war zone. And the way the staff fawned over him? It was disgusting. He probably used miles. Or maybe he was an employee, a deadheading pilot, or a mechanic getting a free ride. She stood up, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor as she approached the desk. She inserted herself directly between the man and Chloe. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice dripping with ice. "I was told we were waiting for a passenger, not staff." The man turned to look at her. His eyes were dark, calm, and held a hint of amusement that Victoria found instantly infuriating. He didn't step back. He just regarded her with polite curiosity. "I am a passenger, ma'am," he said softly. "Please," Victoria scoffed, looking him up and down. "This is the Apex Horizon charter to London. The seat price alone is $15,000. Are you seriously trying to tell me you purchased a ticket?" "I'm on the flight," he said simply. He didn't offer a ticket. He didn't explain himself. He just took the bottle of water Chloe handed him and nodded his thanks. Victoria turned on Chloe. "I want to see his boarding pass. Now." Chloe blinked, her face paling slightly. "Mrs. Street Claire, I assure you, Mr. Sterling is verified." "We don't." "I don't care what you assure me," Victoria interrupted, her voice rising in volume. "I paid a premium for exclusivity." I know how these things work. Airlines oversell, and then they throw in their off-duty crew or friends of the staff to fill the empty seats. I did not pay to sit next to someone who looks like he just came from a basketball game. The room went silent. The ambient jazz seemed to stop. Isaiah Sterling looked at Victoria. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He took a slow sip of water, capped the bottle, and smiled. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. "Ma'am," Isaiah said, "my clothes are comfortable because it's a 7-hour flight. My bag is old because it travels with me everywhere. And I'm here because I have business in London. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe we're ready to board." He gestured toward the tarmac doors. Victoria's face turned a mottled shade of crimson. She wasn't used to being dismissed. She was Victoria Street Clare. Her husband owned the largest construction firm in Connecticut. She was on the board of the Botanical Gardens. People listened to her. "Don't you dare walk away from me," she hissed. "I'm going to make a call. Richard knows the vice president of operations for this airline. If you are sneaking on this flight, you'll be arrested before we even take off." Isaiah stopped. He turned back, his expression unreadable. "You should make that call," he said. "In fact, ask for Robert Vance. Tell him Isaiah is on the flight. See what he says." He turned and walked through the doors toward the waiting jet. Victoria stood fuming, her chest heaving. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling with rage. "Oh, I will," she muttered. "And when I'm done, you'll be lucky if you can get a job sweeping the runway." Chloe watched her, eyes wide, looking like she wanted to say something, wanted to warn her, but she stayed silent. She knew the rules. Never correct the guest, even when the guest was digging her own grave. The aircraft was a Bombardier Global 7500, the pinnacle of private aviation, retrofitted by Apex Horizon to seat just 16 people in absolute luxury. It wasn't a cramped commercial tube. It was a flying penthouse. Cream leather swivel chairs, walnut tables, gold-plated fixtures, and a ceiling that simulated the night sky. Isaiah boarded first, taking seat 1A, the prime spot, usually reserved for the most VIP of VIPs. He placed his battered rucksack in the overhead bin and settled into the seat, pulling out a tablet. He had work to do. The acquisition of the European logistics hub was closing in 48 hours, and he needed to review the compliance files. He barely looked up when Victoria Street. Claire stomped onto the plane 5 minutes later, her face still flushed from her phone call, which had gone to voicemail. She was followed by 2 flight attendants struggling with her luggage. She stopped dead in the aisle when she saw him. "You," she breathed out, the word sounding like a curse. Isaiah didn't look up from his screen. "Me. You are in my seat." She lied. She hadn't even looked at her boarding assignment, but 1A was always the best seat. She wanted it. "I believe the manifest has me in 1A, Isaiah said calmly, "but 1B across the aisle is open. Or any of the other 14 seats. We're the only ones on board so far." "I don't want to sit across from you," she snapped. "I don't want to see you. I want you off this plane. I know what you're doing. You're trying to blend in, hoping no one notices you don't belong here." "Well, I noticed." She turned to the lead flight attendant, a woman named Sarah who had been flying with the company for 10 years. Sarah was currently arranging a vase of fresh orchids on the sideboard. "Stewardess," Victoria barked. Sarah straightened, smoothing her navy blue uniform. She glanced at Isaiah, gave him a barely perceptible nod of respect, and then turned a professional smile to Victoria. "Yes, Mrs. Street Clare? Welcome aboard. May I take your coat?" "Forget the coat," Victoria said, pointing a shaking finger at Isaiah. "I want to see the passenger manifest. I want to know why this man is in 1A. That is the owner's seat. I've flown private enough to know that 1A is reserved for the principal or the highest-paying client." And looking at him, she let out a cruel laugh. "I doubt he could afford the taxes on the ticket, let alone the fare." Sarah's smile faltered, but only for a second. "Mrs. Street, Claire, seat assignments are fixed prior to boarding. Mr. Sterling is in his correct seat, and I can assure you, he is a valued flyer with us." "Valued?" Victoria leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for Isaiah to hear. "Is he a drug dealer? A rapper? Because that's the only way someone like that gets on a flight like this." Isaiah finally looked up. He took off his reading glasses. The silence in the cabin was heavy, suffocating. "Mrs. Street, Claire, Isaiah said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. I run a business. A legitimate, international business. I am tired. I have work to do. I suggest you sit down, drink your champagne, and enjoy the flight. You are embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing myself? Victoria screeched. She grabbed her purse and rummaged through it, pulling out her phone again. I am recording this. I am recording your aggression. You are threatening me. Did you hear that? She whipped around to Sarah. He threatened me. He said I'm embarrassing myself. That is a threat in my culture. She held the phone up, the camera lens pointed directly at Isaiah's face. Say it again, she taunted. Tell me again how I should sit down and shut up. I'm going to send this to TMZ. I'm going to send this to the police. I'm going to have you on the no-fly list by the time we land. Isaiah sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked at Sarah. Sarah, what is our departure window? We are clear for pushback in 10 minutes, Mr. Sterling. Sarah replied softly, her eyes apologetic. Good. Let's get going. Oh, no. Victoria interrupted, stepping into the aisle to block Sarah from moving. We are not going anywhere. I am not flying with a security threat. I demand you call the police. Or airport security. Right now. I want him removed. Sarah took a deep breath. Mrs. Street. Claire, if we call security, it will delay the flight significantly. And based on my observation, Mr. Sterling has done nothing to warrant removal. He has remained calm while you have raised your voice. Are you taking his side? Victoria gasped, her eyes bulging. Because of affirmative action? Is that it? You're afraid to kick him off because you'll get sued? Well, I will sue you. I will sue this entire airline. I want the pilot. Get the captain out here right now. She slammed her hand against the polished walnut partition. Whack. The sound echoed through the cabin. Isaiah closed his tablet. The screen went black. He stood up. He was 6'3", towering over Victoria. She flinched, stepping back, clutching her pearls. You called for the captain? Isaiah asked quietly. Yes, to have you arrested, she yelled, though her voice wavered slightly at his height. Sarah, Isaiah said, keeping his eyes on Victoria. Tell Captain Harrison to come back here. Mrs. Street Claire has a request. Sarah nodded. Yes, sir. She hurried toward the cockpit. Victoria smirked, regaining her composure. See? Now you're in trouble. Captain Harrison won't put up with riffraff in his cabin. I hope you enjoy the view from the tarmac, Mr. Sterling, because you're about to be walked off in handcuffs. She sat down in seat 2B, crossed her legs, and kept her phone trained on him, waiting for the moment of her triumph. She had no idea that she had just pulled the pin on a grenade that was sitting in her own lap. The cockpit door opened with a mechanical hiss, breaking the tense silence of the cabin. Captain Harrison emerged, a man who looked exactly like what you'd want a pilot to look like. Silver hair, jawline like a cliffside, and a uniform pressed to military precision. He had 4 gold stripes on his epaulettes, gleaming under the cabin's LED lights. Victoria Saint. Claire practically vibrated with vindication. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, assuming the posture of a damsel in distress who had finally found her savior. Captain, she exclaimed, rushing toward him, ignoring the fasten seatbelt sign that had just flickered on. Thank God you're here. This has been an absolute nightmare. Your flight attendant is incompetent. And this person, she gestured violently at Isaiah, is refusing to leave my chartered flight. Captain Harrison paused. He looked at Victoria, then his eyes slid past her to Isaiah, who was sitting calmly in seat 1A, legs crossed, inspecting a smudge on his sneaker. The captain's expression didn't change, but the air in the room shifted. Ma'am, he said, his voice a deep rumble, please return to your seat. We are in an active taxi pattern. I will not sit down, Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking. Did you hear me? I want him removed. He threatened me. He's sitting in the VIP seat, acting like he owns the place. I paid $12,000 for this seat, and I demand you drag him off. If you don't, I will have your license. My husband plays golf with the CEO of the airport authority. Harrison took a slow breath. He stepped fully into the cabin. He didn't look at Victoria. He walked straight past her, stopping in front of seat 1A. Victoria smirked. Finally, she thought, he's going to grab him by the collar. Captain Harrison stood at attention. He nodded sharply to Isaiah. Everything all right, sir? Isaiah looked up, a weary smile playing on his lips. It's been a long morning, Jim. I think Mrs. Street Claire is under the impression that I'm a stowaway. I see, Harrison said. He turned slowly to face Victoria. Ma'am, the gentleman in 1A is not a stowaway. He is on the manifest. In fact, his presence is the only reason we were able to secure this slot time. Now, please, sit down so we can depart. Victoria's brain couldn't process the information. It rejected it like a bad organ transplant. Manifest? Slot time? No. It was a conspiracy. They were covering for him. Maybe the pilot was in on the drug deal? Maybe they were using the plane to move contraband, and she was the inconvenient witness? Her panic morphed into a cold, hard rage. You're lying, she whispered, backing away. You're all in on it. I've seen this on the news. The cartels pay off the pilots. That's what this is? She fumbled for her phone again, her fingers sliding over the screen. I'm calling the police. Real police. Not you fake security guards. I'm calling Port Authority. I'm telling them there's a hijacking in progress. Ma'am, do not do that, Captain Harrison warned, his voice losing its customer service edge. Making a false report of a hijacking is a federal felony. Put the phone down. It's not false if I'm terrified, Victoria yelled. She hit the dial button on the emergency contact for Teterboro Security she had looked up earlier. Hello? Yes, this is Victoria Street Claire. I am on the Apex Horizon flight to London. There is a man on board. Yes, a black man. He is aggressive, he has threatened me, and the pilot is refusing to remove him. I think they are working together. I am in danger. Send a SWAT team. Send everyone. Isaiah closed his eyes and sighed. Well, he muttered to himself, there goes the slot time. The cabin fell into a heavy, distinct silence as Victoria panted, holding the phone to her chest. She looked triumphant. They're coming, she sneered. They're coming with guns. And when they get here, they're going to drag you out of that seat, and I'm going to laugh. I hope you like prison food. Isaiah stood up. He didn't look scared. He looked disappointed. He walked over to the sideboard where the crystal decanters were secured. He poured himself a glass of sparkling water. He really should have just watched a movie, Victoria, Isaiah said softly. Don't speak to me, she hissed. You're a criminal. A thug in a turtleneck. Outside the window, the flashing red and blue lights of 3 Port Authority SUVs reflected against the sleek white wing of the aircraft. The cavalry had arrived. But they weren't coming to save Victoria. The boarding stairs were reattached with a heavy thud. The door swung open, revealing the crisp, cold air of the tarmac and 3 oversized police officers. Their hands rested near their holsters, standard procedure for a hijacking, hostage call. Victoria rushed the door before the flight attendant could stop her. Officers, thank God, she cried, pointing a shaking finger back into the cabin. It's him, the one in 1A, and the pilot. They're conspiring against me. He has a weapon. Well, he threatened me like he had a weapon. Get him off my plane. The lead officer, Sergeant Miller, was a large man who had worked Teterboro for 20 years. He scanned the scene. He saw a hysterical woman in Chanel clutching a phone like a grenade. He saw Captain Harrison standing with his arms crossed, looking annoyed. And then he saw the man in 1A. Sergeant Miller's tense posture instantly relaxed. He actually smiled. He bypassed Victoria entirely, stepping around her as if she were a piece of luggage left in the aisle. He walked straight up to Isaiah. Mr. Sterling, Sergeant Miller said, extending a hand. Good to see you again, sir. Sorry about the commotion. We got a call about a hijacking? Victoria froze. Her mouth hung open. She looked from the police officer to the thug in 1A. Isaiah shook the officer's hand firmly. Hello, Sergeant. No hijacking, I'm afraid. Just a passenger who is very confused about the seating arrangements. And apparently, my employment history? I see, Miller said, chuckling. He turned to Victoria, his face hardening instantly. Ma'am, step back. You are interfering with a flight crew. Victoria stammered. You know his name? Why do you know his name? Did he bribe you too? Bribe me? Miller raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, do you know who this is? He's a stowaway, she shrieked, doubling down because her ego allowed no other option. He's nobody. He's sitting in the owner's seat. Isaiah stepped forward. He placed his glass of water down on the table with a sharp clink. The sound cut through Victoria's hysteria. Actually, Victoria, Isaiah said, his voice calm, projecting authority that filled the entire cabin. You're half right. I am sitting in the owner's seat. He adjusted his cuffs. Because I am the owner. Victoria blinked. What? I am Isaiah Sterling, he continued, stepping closer to her. Founder and CEO of Sterling Aviation. Parent company of Apex Horizon. I designed the interior of this jet. I signed the check that bought it. And I signed the paychecks of everyone you've been yelling at for the last 20 minutes. The silence that followed was louder than the jet engines outside. No, Victoria whispered. That's impossible. You look like what? Isaiah challenged, his eyes narrowing. Say it. You've been dying to say it since the lounge. I look like what? The help? A criminal? Because I'm not wearing a three-piece suit? Because of the color of my skin? My husband knows the owner. She grasped at straws. He said the owner is a man named Vance. Robert Vance is my vice president of operations. Isaiah corrected her coldly. He reports to me. You told me to call him earlier. Would you like me to do that now? I have him on speed dial. Isaiah pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once, put it on speaker, and held it up. Ring. Ring. Isaiah? A voice answered instantly. Everything okay? We saw the delay on the board. Hey Rob, Isaiah said, never breaking eye contact with Victoria. I have a Mrs. Victoria Street Clare here. She claims her husband, Richard, knows you, and she's currently telling the police that I've hijacked my own plane. There was a pause on the line. Then, a weary sigh. Richard Street Clare, the construction guy? Yeah, I met him at a charity gala once. He bought a table. I wouldn't say I know him. Isaiah, is she the one causing the scene? She is. Do you want me to terminate her contract? I'm handling it, Isaiah said. Thanks, Rob. He hung up. Victoria looked like she was going to be sick. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and aged. The reality of what she had done was crashing down on her like a collapsing building. She had called the police on the billionaire owner of the airline, on his own plane, after racially profiling him. Mr. Sterling, Sergeant Miller interrupted, his voice serious. Since there is no hijacking, we have a different issue. False reporting of an incident. Disturbing the peace. Interference with a flight crew. Do you want to press charges? Victoria let out a whimper. No, please. It was a misunderstanding. I'm under a lot of stress. My medication. She looked at Isaiah, her eyes pleading. Mr. Sterling, please. I didn't know. If I had known who you were. That, Isaiah said, pointing a finger at her, is exactly the problem. If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me with respect. But because you thought I was regular, because you thought I was beneath you, you treated me like garbage. Character isn't how you treat your equals, Victoria. It's how you treat the people you think you're better than. He turned to the flight attendant. Sarah? Yes, Mr. Sterling? Is Mrs. Street Clare's luggage still in the hold? Yes, sir. Offload it. The walk of shame is a phrase usually reserved for hungover college students or disgraced politicians. But what happened to Victoria Street Clare that afternoon redefined the term. You can't do this, Victoria cried as Sergeant Miller placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. I have a ticket. I have a contract. My husband will sue you into the ground. Read the fine print, Victoria, Isaiah said, sitting back down in seat 1A and opening his tablet again. Clause 4. Section C. Apex Horizon reserves the right to refuse service to any passenger who exhibits abusive behavior, endangers the crew, or, and this is my favorite part, annoys the owner. It doesn't say that, she screamed. It does in my contract, he said without looking up. Get her off my plane. The physical removal was humiliating. Victoria didn't walk willingly. She went limp, forcing the two officers to grab her by the arms and half-drag her down the aisle. Her heels scraped against the carpet she had claimed was too expensive for Isaiah's shoes. This is assault, she yelled, her voice echoing into the terminal. I am Victoria Street Clare. Do you know who I am? Yeah, lady, we know, one of the officers grunted. You're the lady who just got banned from the sky. As they dragged her onto the tarmac, the other passengers for the flight had arrived. A tech billionaire and his wife, and a famous British architect. They were standing at the bottom of the stairs, watching the spectacle. Victoria locked eyes with the architect, a man she had tried to social climb with for years. Oh, hello, Victoria, the architect said, raising an eyebrow. Going somewhere? Victoria squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the tarmac would open up and swallow her whole. Back on the plane, the atmosphere instantly lightened. The air felt cleaner. Captain Harrison poked his head out of the cockpit. Bags are off, sir. We've lost our slot, though. ATC says we have a 40-minute hold before we can push back. Isaiah looked out the window. He watched as Victoria stood by her pile of Louis Vuitton bags, arguing with a ground crew member who was clearly not interested in her problems. She looked small, defeated, and for the first time in her life, utterly powerless. "That's fine, Jim," Isaiah said, relaxing into the soft leather of seat 1A. "Open a bottle of the Cristal for the crew. Let's wait in style. I think we've earned a moment of peace." Sarah brought the champagne, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly as she poured, "thank you. For, most bosses would have just moved seats to avoid the hassle." Isaiah took the glass. "Sarah, I built this company so people could fly with dignity. That includes you. And that includes me. Nobody comes into my house and disrespects the family." He took a sip. "Now," he said, tapping his tablet, "let's see if we can get this acquisition closed before we land. I have a feeling I'm going to need the extra cash. Richard Street. Claire is definitely going to try to sue me." He smiled, a shark-like, satisfied smile. "I can't wait." The drive from Teterboro back to Greenwich, Connecticut, is usually a drive Victoria Street Claire savored. It was a transition from the noise of the city to the manicured silence of her estate, a victory lap after a trip abroad. But today, inside the back of a Toyota Camry Uber that smelled faintly of pine air freshener and stale tobacco, it felt like a funeral procession. She had been banned. Actually banned. Victoria stared out the window as the gray landscape of I-95 rushed by. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. She had tried to call Richard 3 times. Each time, it went straight to voicemail. That wasn't like him. Richard lived with his phone surgically attached to his hand. He never missed a call from her, mostly because he knew ignoring her resulted in a headache he didn't want to deal with later. "Can't you go any faster?" Victoria snapped at the driver, a weary-looking man named Ahmed. "I'm paying for a service, not a scenic tour of the breakdown lane." Ahmed glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his eyes tired but sharp. "Traffic is heavy, ma'am. There is an accident near White Plains." "Of course there is," she muttered, sinking back into the seat. "Everything is incompetent today." She unlocked her phone again, her thumb hovering over the Twitter icon. She knew she shouldn't look. She knew it was a mistake. But the morbid curiosity was a physical pull, like gravity. She tapped the blue bird. Her breath hitched in her throat. The trending tab was usually filled with politics or celebrity breakups. Today, the #1 trend in the United States was number First Class Karen. The number 3 trend was number Isaiah Sterling. And number 5 was number Apex Horizon. Her stomach dropped through the floorboards of the car. She clicked the first hashtag. The top post wasn't just a tweet, it was a high-definition video. It wasn't the shaky, vertical footage she had taken of Isaiah. No, this was steady, cinematic, and damning. It had been filmed from the stairs of the jet by someone standing outside. She recognized the angle immediately. It was Julian Thorne, the Pulitzer-winning architect she had been desperate to impress at the gala last spring. He had been recording the entire time she was being dragged off the tarmac. The caption read, "Witnessed absolute madness at Teterboro today. A woman tried to kick the owner of the airline off his own G700 because she didn't believe a black man could fly first class. The entitlement is a disease. Kudos to Isaiah Sterling for handling it with grace." Number karma. The video had 8.4 million views. It had been posted 2 hours ago. Victoria watched in horror. The video showed her screaming, her face contorted in an ugly, unrecognizable rage. It showed the police officers wrestling her luggage away. It showed her shrieking, "Do you know who I am?" And then, the camera panned to Isaiah Sterling. He looked cool, calm, and devastatingly unbothered as he sipped his water. She scrolled down to the comments. They were a firing squad. Asterisk at Flygirl99. Imagine calling the cops on the guy who signs the paychecks. This is career suicide. Asterisk at Wall Street Wolf. I know her husband. Richard Street Claire runs a construction firm in CT. Bet he's having a great afternoon lol. Asterisk at Justice Seeker. I hope she loses everything. Racism in 2024 is expensive. Turn the radio off, Victoria shrieked suddenly. The driver jumped. Ma'am? I said turn it off. The low hum of NPR had been discussing a viral incident at a New Jersey airport. She couldn't bear to hear it. She felt like the walls of the car were closing in. She needed to get to Richard. Richard would fix this. Richard knew people. He could get the video taken down. He could sue Twitter. He could sue Julian Thorne for invasion of privacy. He was a fixer. That's what he did. When the Uber finally pulled up to the wrought iron gates of their Greenwich estate, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. The house, a sprawling Georgian manor that they had spent 3 years renovating, looked imposing and cold. Usually, the driveway lights would be on by now. They were dark. Victoria didn't wait for Ahmed to open her door. She scrambled out, leaving her luggage on the gravel, and ran to the front door. She fumbled with her keys, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Richard," she called out as she burst into the foyer. The house was eerily silent. The crystal chandelier in the hallway was dim. There was no smell of dinner cooking. Mrs. Higgins, their cook of 7 years, was nowhere to be seen. "Richard?" She walked toward his study at the back of the house. The heavy oak doors were slightly ajar. A flicker of blue light from the television danced on the hallway floor. She pushed the door open. Richard Street Clare was standing by the window, his back to her. He was still wearing his suit jacket, which was unusual. He always changed into a cashmere sweater the moment he got home. In his hand was a glass of amber liquid, darker and fuller than his usual evening pour. On the massive flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace, CNN was playing. The headline on the chyron was bright red. Airline CEO racially profiled on own jet. "Richard," Victoria breathed, stepping into the room. "Thank God you're here. You have to help me. It's all a lie. The video is edited. They cut out the part where he threatened me. You have to call the lawyers. We have to sue them for defamation." Richard didn't turn around. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. The ice cubes clinked against the glass, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Defamation," Richard said. His voice was flat, devoid of warmth, devoid of anger. It sounded like dead leaves scraping on pavement. "That implies that what they are saying is false, Victoria." "It is false," she insisted, rushing to his side. She grabbed his arm, but he pulled away from her touch as if she were burning hot. He finally turned to look at her. Victoria gasped. She had expected anger. She had expected shouting. She was prepared for him to yell at her for causing a scene. But she wasn't prepared for this. Richard looked gray. His face was drawn, his eyes hollowed out. He looked like a man who had just been told he had a month to live. "Richard, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that?" He walked over to his mahogany desk. On the leather blotter sat a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a printout, it was a formal letter on heavy, cream-colored bond paper with a silver embossed header. "Do you know what this is?" he asked quietly. Victoria squinted at it. "A letter?" "It's a termination notice," Richard said. "From Sterling Global Holdings." "Sterling?" Victoria blinked. "The airline guy? What does he have to do with you?" Richard let out a laugh, a sharp, barking sound that had no humor in it. "He doesn't just own the airline, Victoria. Isaiah Sterling is the majority shareholder of the consortium that is financing the Hudson Yards Phase 2 project." The blood drained from Victoria's face. Hudson Yards. The deal. The biggest contract in the history of Street Clare construction. The deal that was supposed to put them into the stratosphere of wealth. The deal that Richard had been working on for 18 months. He's the money?" she whispered. "He is the chairman of the board," Richard corrected. "And as of 4:30 p.m. today, approximately 20 minutes after your little performance went viral, he personally exercised the character and reputational risk clause in our preliminary agreement." Richard picked up the letter and read aloud, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Mr. Street Clare, we regret to inform you that Sterling Global is withdrawing its bid acceptance for Street Clare construction. Our corporate ethos is built on dignity, respect, and equality. The widely publicized behavior of your spouse, Mrs. Victoria Street Clare, directly contradicts these values and poses a significant public relations liability to our development. We cannot be associated with a family name that has become synonymous with bigotry." He He dropped the paper. It drifted down to the desk, settling next to his untouched humidor. $40 million, Richard whispered. $40 million, gone. In an afternoon. Because you couldn't stand the sight of a black man sitting in a seat you thought you deserved. I didn't know, Victoria cried, tears finally spilling over. I thought he was a criminal. He was wearing a hoodie. He was wearing a $3,000 cashmere pullover, Richard roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. The force of the blow knocked a crystal paperweight to the floor, shattering it. Victoria flinched, backing into the bookshelf. You are so blinded by your own arrogance you can't even see reality, Richard shouted, advancing on her. You think because I buy you nice things, you're better than people? You think because you have a platinum card, you're the queen of the world? You're nothing, Victoria. You're a liability. Don't say that, she sobbed. I'm your wife. We can fix this. We'll apologize. I'll make a public statement. I'll say I was on medication. I'll say I was having a panic attack. People forgive panic attacks. It's too late for that, Richard spat. My phone has been ringing for 3 hours. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They want me to step down as CEO, Victoria. They said my judgment is compromised because I'm married to the first-class Karen. Do you understand? I am going to lose my company, my father's company. He walked past her, heading toward the door of the study. Where are you going? She asked, her voice thin and terrified. I'm going to the club, he said. I'm going to drink until I pass out. And tomorrow morning, I am meeting with Cohen and Green. Victoria froze. Cohen and Green weren't corporate lawyers. They were the most ruthless divorce attorneys in Manhattan. Richard. No. You can't. The prenup, the house. He stopped in the doorway and looked back at her. His eyes were cold, dead things. The prenup has a clause for material damage to business reputation. Victoria, you signed it. You didn't read it because you never read anything, but you signed it. He buttoned his jacket. You destroyed my life today, Victoria. Don't expect me to pay for yours anymore. He walked out. The front door slammed shut a moment later, the sound echoing through the empty, silent house like the final nail in a very expensive coffin. Victoria stood alone in the study. The TV was still on. On the screen, a panel of pundits was dissecting the video. A news anchor shook her head and said, You really have to wonder. Was it worth it? Victoria sank to her knees on the Persian rug, clutching the termination letter to her chest, and for the first time in her life, she screamed. But in the empty house, with the servants gone and her husband leaving, there was no one left to hear her. The fall of Victoria Street Clare didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a cliff she walked off. It was a slow, agonizing slide down a mountain of jagged rocks, and she hit every single one on the way down. The divorce was not a battle. It was an execution. 2 weeks after the incident at Teterboro, Victoria sat in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne. On one side of the mahogany table sat Richard and 3 lawyers from Cohen and Green. On her side sat a weary general practitioner she had found on Yelp because her usual attorney, the one who handled her speeding tickets, had politely declined to represent her, citing a conflict of interest. The conflict, of course, was that nobody wanted to be associated with the first-class Karen. Mrs. Street Clare, Richard's lead attorney began, sliding a thick document across the table. As per the prenup signed in 2018, specifically Clause 14, Section B regarding actions causing material reputational harm to the principal earner, Mr. Street, Clare is filing for an at-fault dissolution. Victoria looked at Richard. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was scrolling through emails on his phone, looking bored. Richard, please, she whispered. We've been married for 12 years. And in 12 minutes, you cost me $40 million, Richard said without looking up. Sign the papers, Victoria. If you fight this, I will sue you personally for the lost revenue. I will garnish every wage you ever earn until you die. She signed. The aftermath was a lesson in the fragility of social status. The Greenwich Country Club didn't send a letter. They simply deactivated her gate pass. When she tried to drive in for her Tuesday tennis lesson, the guard, a man she had never bothered to learn the name of, simply shook his head and pointed to the U-turn lane. Her friends were even colder. The charity gala invitations stopped coming. The brunch texts went unanswered. When she ran into Cynthia, her maid of honor, At the grocery store, Cynthia literally abandoned a cart full of produce in the aisle and walked out the back exit to avoid talking to her. Victoria was radioactive. 1 year later, the fluorescent lights of JFK Terminal 4 hummed with a headache-inducing flicker. It was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, a day that travelers refer to as the Gauntlet. The air in the terminal was a thick, humid soup of anxiety, stale cinnamon buns, and too many bodies pressed into too little space. A child was screaming near the charging station. A man was eating a tuna sandwich with his mouth open 2 seats away. Victoria Street Claire sat in a plastic bucket seat at gate B32, clutching a boarding pass that felt like a burning coal in her hand. Spirit Airlines Flight 404 to Cleveland, Zone 4, Seat 38E, middle seat, back row, right next to the lavatory. She looked different. The woman who had once commanded a private lounge with a snap of her fingers was gone. In her place was a tired, faded woman in her late 40s. Her hair, once a chemically perfect platinum blonde maintained by a $600 a month colorist, was now a dull, brassy straw color pulled back into a severe, messy bun. The roots were showing. She wore a beige cardigan she had bought at Target and a pair of jeans that were slightly too loose because she had lost 15 pounds from stress. Her Louis Vuitton luggage was gone, seized by Richard's lawyers to cover incidental legal fees. At her feet sat a battered, generic rolling suitcase with a sticky wheel. She was moving to Cleveland to live in her sister's guest room. Her sister, Brenda, whom Victoria had made fun of for years for living a pedestrian life, was the only person who had picked up the phone. Flight 404 is delayed another 40 minutes due to crew availability, the gate agent announced over the crackling intercom. A collective groan rippled through the crowd. Victoria didn't groan. She didn't have the energy. She just leaned her head against the cool glass of the terminal window and closed her eyes. Unbelievable, the woman next to her muttered. This airline is trash. Victoria opened one eye. It's not the airline, she whispered, her voice raspy. It's the price we pay. She turned her head to look out the window, trying to escape the smell of the tuna sandwich. The view from the economy terminal looked out over the sprawling tarmac. In the foreground, baggage handlers were tossing suitcases onto a conveyor belt with reckless abandon. But in the distance, across the shimmering heat of the runway, lay a different world. The private aviation terminal. The building gleamed in the setting sun, a structure of glass and steel that looked more like a modern art museum than an airport. Parked in front of the private hangar was a jet. Victoria's breath hitched. It was a Bombardier Global 8000. It was sleeker, larger, and more intimidating than the G700 she had been thrown off of. The tail was painted a deep, midnight blue with a silver S sweeping across the stabilizer. Sterling Aviation. The name was everywhere now. Since the incident, Isaiah Sterling hadn't just survived, he had thrived. The viral video had turned him into a folk hero. His company's stock had tripled. He was on the cover of Forbes last month as the face of modern dignity. Victoria watched, mesmerized, as a black SUV pulled up to the stairs of the private jet. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Even from this distance, she knew him. The posture, the casual confidence, the way he moved like the air around him was thinner, easier to breathe. Isaiah Sterling. He was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit this time, not a hoodie. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned to help someone out of the car. A woman, stunning, elegant, laughing, took his hand. Then 2 children, a boy and a girl, tumbled out, carrying backpacks that looked surprisingly like the battered rucksack Isaiah had carried that day. They were a family. A happy, wealthy, unbothered family. Isaiah said something to the pilot waiting at the stairs. The pilot laughed a genuine, respectful laugh, not the forced chuckle of an employee fearing for his job. Isaiah clapped the man on the shoulder. Then, before he boarded, Isaiah paused. He turned around and looked out across the tarmac. He seemed to be looking directly at Terminal 4. For a terrifying, heart-stopping second, Victoria felt like he could see her. She felt exposed, as if the glass window had melted away, leaving her naked in her shame. She wanted to duck. She wanted to hide behind the tuna sandwich man. But Isaiah wasn't looking at her. He didn't know she was there. To him, she was a ghost. A bad afternoon from a year ago that he had already turned into a profitable anecdote for his memoir. He wasn't angry. He wasn't holding a grudge. He was just living. He raised a hand to shield his eyes from the sunset, smiled at the horizon, and jogged up the stairs of his jet. The door closed with a smooth, silent seal. A moment later, the massive engines of the Global 8000 flared to life, a low, powerful rumble that vibrated even the glass of the economy terminal. "Now, that is how I want to fly," the tuna sandwich man said, chewing loudly. "Must be nice to be the king, huh?" Victoria watched as the silver jet taxied past their gate, gleaming like a diamond against the gray concrete. It picked up speed, defying gravity, and soared into the clouds, banking toward London, or Paris, or somewhere that didn't smell like regret. "Zone 4, now boarding," the spirit agent yelled. "Bring only one personal item. If it doesn't fit in the sizer, it's $100. Victoria stood up. Her knees popped. She grabbed the handle of her broken suitcase. She looked at the empty runway where the jet had been. And then she looked at the line of angry, tired people shuffling toward the narrow tunnel of the economy jet bridge. "Ma'am, you can't block the aisle," the agent snapped at her as she hesitated at the podium. "Scan your pass or step aside." Victoria looked at the agent. A year ago, she would have demanded his manager. She would have threatened his job. She would have caused a scene. Today, she just lowered her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm moving." She scanned her pass. It beeped a harsh, rejecting sound before turning green. She walked down the jet bridge, dragging her heavy bag behind her, stepping into the cramped, stuffy tube of the plane to find her middle seat in the last row. As she sat down, squeezing her elbows in to avoid touching the strangers on either side, she realized the final, brutal truth of karma. It wasn't that Isaiah Sterling had ruined her. It was that he hadn't needed to do anything at all. He had simply let her be herself, and that had been enough to destroy everything. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we're number 14 for takeoff. It's going to be a bit of a wait." Victoria closed her eyes, and the tears finally came, silent and hot, as the plane sat on the tarmac, grounded and heavy, while the kings of the sky flew on without her. Victoria Street Claire learned the hard way that money can buy a first-class ticket, but it can't buy class. She thought her status gave her the right to judge a man by his skin color and his clothes. Instead, she found out that the man in the hoodie might just own the airline. In the end, Isaiah Sterling didn't need to yell, he didn't need to threaten, and he didn't need to fight. He just needed to be himself. The universe and a very strict contract clause handled the rest. It's a reminder to all of us. Treat everyone with respect, whether they're the CEO or the janitor. You never know who you're talking to, and you never know when the tables might turn. What would you have done if you were Isaiah? Would you have kicked her off? Or let her fly in shame? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Thanks for watching, and fly safe.